This is just another story about something hiding in the dark, something strange that appears when the lights go out. But what I'm about to tell you is not only about fear in the shadows. It is about the kind of fear that lives with you in daylight, the kind you learn to hide, the kind that becomes normal until something unnatural forces you to finally see it. That night when the power cut happened, I believed I was afraid of the darkness, but I was wrong. The darkness was the only place where the truth was brave enough to show itself, and what appeared in my room was not there to scare me, but to make sure I could never ignore what was already destroying me. It was late evening and the heat in the house was unbearable. The fan was spinning slowly, pushing around warm air that did nothing to ease the tension in the room. My husband, Asim, was already in a bad mood, sitting on the edge of the bed, tapping his foot impatiently as if the world was failing him personally. I had learned to read these signs very well. His silence was never peaceful, it was a warning. I stayed in the corner, folding clothes that didn't need folding, just to keep my hands busy and my presence small. Then, without any warning, the power went out. The fan stopped, the light disappeared, and the room was swallowed by thick darkness. In that moment, the silence felt louder than anything I had ever heard. Asim cursed under his breath, his voice sharp and dangerous. He blamed the heat, the electricity, the world outside, but I knew it wouldn't take long before that anger turned toward me. I moved slowly, trying to reach for my phone to turn on the flashlight, but he snapped at me immediately, his voice cutting through the dark like a blade, telling me to sit down and stop making noise. My body reacted before my mind could even process it, and I froze, whispering a quiet apology that I didn't even understand anymore. That was how my life worked. I avoided, I obeyed, I survived. But that night, something else was listening. At first, it was just a faint sound, so soft that I thought I imagined it. A gentle tapping, like fingers brushing lightly against glass.
Tap, tap, tap.
It came from the window. I turned my head slowly, my eyes trying to adjust to the darkness, but I couldn't see anything clearly. I told myself it was the wind, maybe something loose outside, but deep inside, I knew the air was still. The sound came again. Slower this time, more deliberate, as if whoever, or whatever, was making it wanted me to notice. My chest tightened, and I felt a cold sensation spread through my arms. I whispered to Asim that someone might be outside, but he reacted exactly as I feared. He stood up angrily, accusing me of trying to create drama, of being foolish, of wasting his patience. His footsteps were heavy as he walked toward the window, pulling the curtain aside with force. For a moment, there was nothing, just darkness outside, empty and quiet. He turned back toward me with irritation, his voice filled with blame, telling me there was nothing there, that I should stop acting like a child. I lowered my eyes, but something inside me refused to calm down, because I knew. I had felt it. Something had been there. Then the air changed. It became colder, heavier, like the room itself was holding its breath. And that's when I heard it again, but this time, it wasn't coming from outside. It came from somewhere inside the house. A low, quiet laugh, stretched thin and unnatural, like someone trying to sound human, but failing. My heart began to pound so loudly I thought it would give me away. Asim heard it too this time, because he went silent. For a moment, we both just listened, frozen in place as the sound faded into the darkness. Then it came again, clearer, closer. He grabbed a small torch and moved toward the hallway, his steps slower now, less confident. I stayed where I was, unable to move, watching the narrow beam of light cut through the dark like a fragile line of safety. The walls seemed longer than usual, the shadows deeper, and then the light stopped moving. Asim stood still, his body stiff, as if he had seen something he couldn't understand. I couldn't see clearly from where I was, but I felt it. Something was there with him, something watching. Then the torch flickered and died, and the darkness rushed back instantly, thicker than before. Footsteps followed. Not rushed, not loud, but steady and calm, like someone who knew exactly where they were going. Each step felt heavier than the last, echoing softly through the house. I couldn't see anything, but I knew it was getting closer. My breathing became shallow, my hands shaking as I tried to make sense of what was happening. And then, a voice broke the silence. Soft, almost playful, but carrying a strange weight that made my skin crawl. It said very clearly, "You shouldn't hurt her." The words hung in the air, simple but impossible to ignore. Asim shouted into the darkness, demanding to know who was there, but there was no answer. Only silence followed, deep and suffocating. Then suddenly the lights flickered and came back on. The room looked normal again, the hallway empty, the walls unchanged, but something was different. Asim's face had lost its anger. There was fear there now, something I had never seen before. He tried to laugh it off, saying it must have been a trick of the mind, but his voice didn't sound convincing. That night he didn't shout again. He didn't come near me. He just sat quietly, as if waiting for something else to happen. The next night, the power went out again, and this time I didn't feel surprised. I felt prepared, even though I didn't understand why. I sat in the same place, my body tense, my eyes focused on the darkness around me. The tapping came again, slow and familiar, but I didn't look at the window right away. I already knew what I would see. When I finally turned my head, my breath caught in my throat. The clown was there, but not outside. It was inside the room, standing in the corner as if it had always belonged there. Its face was pale, its smile stretched too wide, and its eyes were fixed on me with an intensity that felt impossible. It didn't move at first. It just watched. Then slowly it raised its hand and pointed across the room. Not at me, but at Asim, who was asleep on the bed. The meaning was clear, even if I didn't want to accept it. The clown began to walk, each step slow and deliberate, making no sound at all. I wanted to scream, to stop it, but something deep inside me held me still. It reached the bed and leaned down slightly, as if whispering something into his ear. Asim woke up suddenly, screaming, his eyes wide with terror, but he kept saying he couldn't see anything. He looked around wildly, shaking, begging for whatever was there to leave him alone. The clown straightened and turned its head toward me again. Its smile didn't change, but something in its presence felt different now, less threatening, more certain. It spoke softly, its voice echoing strangely in the quiet room. "You see the truth." The words settled into my mind like something I had always known, but never allowed myself to believe. Then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, it was gone. The power returned, the lights came back, and everything looked normal again, but nothing felt the same. After that night, Asim changed. He became quiet, distant, always nervous, as if he expected something to appear at any moment. He stopped shouting. He stopped hurting me. Sometimes, in the middle of the night, he would wake up screaming, claiming someone was standing in the room watching him. But when I looked, there was nothing there. I never saw the clown again for a long time, and part of me wondered if it had only come because it needed to. Weeks later, during another sudden power cut, I felt that same cold presence return. I turned slowly, and there it was again, standing closer than before, but this time its expression felt different. The smile was still there, but it didn't feel cruel. It felt calm. It looked only at me, ignoring everything else, and spoke one final time. "You are safe now." And then it disappeared, leaving behind a silence that felt lighter, like something heavy had finally been lifted. You might think the clown was the monster in this story, but the truth is much more complicated. Because before it ever appeared, I was already living in fear every single day. The darkness was not created by the power cut. It was already inside my home, hiding in plain sight. The clown didn't bring the horror into my life. It forced it into the open. And sometimes, when the lights flicker or the room grows quiet, I still wonder if it is watching from somewhere unseen, making sure the truth is never hidden again. You will understand why she never turned the lights off again, but first you need to know about the nights when everything looked normal, because that is how the danger hid itself, quietly, politely, waiting for the right moment. Sana used to believe that fear had a loud sound, like shouting or breaking glass, but in her home it came softly, like a whisper behind a closed door, like the slow creak of a floorboard when everyone else was asleep, and like the faint smell of grease paint that did not belong in her bedroom. The first time she noticed it, she told herself she was tired, that her mind was playing tricks, but later she would wish she had listened to that small voice inside her that said something was deeply wrong. Her husband, Imran, worked as a clown at children's parties, and during the day he was charming, smiling, and full of jokes that made other people laugh easily. But inside their home, especially at night, his face seemed to change in a way she could not explain. He would come home late, still wearing traces of his makeup, sometimes with red paint stuck near his ears or white powder on his neck, and he would sit in silence, staring at nothing, as if he was waiting for something invisible to arrive. Sana used to ask him gentle questions, trying to understand his mood, but he would snap at her without warning, his voice sharp and cold, turning small moments into heavy arguments that left her feeling smaller each time. Over time, she learned to stay quiet, to move carefully, to avoid anything that could make him angry, because anger came fast, and it stayed long after the shouting stopped. But the story is not about the shouting, not completely, because what frightened Sana more was what happened after the house became silent. Every night after Imran finally fell asleep or pretended to, she would lie awake, her eyes open in the dark, listening to the strange stillness of the room. At first, it was just a feeling, like someone watching her from a corner she could not see, but soon it became something more real. She started hearing soft footsteps, slow and careful, as if someone was walking around the bed, pausing, then moving again. She would hold her breath, waiting for the sound to stop, but it never stopped quickly. It stretched into long minutes that felt like hours, until finally it faded just before dawn. When she told herself it was just her imagination, she almost believed it, but then she noticed the small details that could not be explained. One morning, she woke up and found a faint red smudge on her pillow, the same color as clown paint, and she felt her chest tighten as she tried to remember if Imran had come close to her during the night. He was already awake, sitting in the kitchen, drinking tea as if nothing had happened, and when she asked him about the paint, he looked at her with a strange smile that did not reach his eyes. He said she must have touched something by mistake, that she was overthinking again, and his calm tone made her question her own memory. But that night, the smell returned, stronger this time, mixed with something else, something old and damp, like a costume that had been worn too many times without being cleaned. The nights grew heavier, and the fear became something she carried even during the day, like a shadow that followed her from room to room. She began noticing that Imran would sometimes stand in front of the mirror for a long time, even when he was not preparing for work, his fingers tracing his face slowly, as if he was imagining the makeup that was not there. Once she walked into the room and found him smiling at his reflection, but the smile was wide and stretched, unnatural, and when he saw her, he dropped it instantly, his face going blank. He asked her why she was staring, and she could not answer because she did not have the words to explain what she had just seen. If you think this is where the story becomes clear, it does not, because the truth waited until Sana stopped questioning and started accepting, and that is when it showed itself fully. One night, after a long argument that ended with Imran throwing a glass against the wall, she locked herself in the bedroom, her hands shaking as she tried to calm her breathing. She decided she would not sleep, that she would stay awake and prove to herself that the sounds were not real. The clock moved slowly, each second louder than the last, and for a while nothing happened. Then, just when she felt her eyes growing heavy, she heard it again. The soft footsteps, closer than before. This time she did not close her eyes. She kept them open, staring into the darkness, her heart beating so loudly she thought it would give her away. The footsteps circled the bed once, twice, and then stopped near her side. She could feel a presence, heavy and close, as if someone was leaning over her, watching her face carefully. She wanted to scream, but her voice would not come out, and she realized with a cold wave of terror that her body could not move. She was awake, fully aware, but completely frozen. Then, slowly a hand appeared in her vision, pale and covered in smudged white paint, the fingers long and still, hovering just above her cheek. Before you imagine what happened next, understand this. The most frightening part was not the hand itself, but the silence that came with it, a silence that felt alive, pressing against her ears, filling the room completely. The hand did not touch her at first. It stayed there, waiting, as if enjoying the moment, as if it had all the time in the world. When it finally moved, it brushed her face lightly, leaving a cold line across her skin, and she felt tears forming in her eyes, unable to stop them. She wanted to look away, but she could not, and then she saw the face leaning into the faint light. It was Imran, but not the Imran she knew. His face was fully painted, white and red, with a wide smile drawn across his lips, but the paint was uneven, cracked in places as if it had been applied in the dark. His eyes were open wide, staring directly into hers, and they held no warmth, no recognition. Only a strange excitement that made her stomach turn. He did not speak at first. He just watched her, breathing slowly, his head tilted slightly, like a performer waiting for an audience reaction. Then, in a soft voice that did not sound like his own, he whispered that he liked it when everyone was asleep, because that was when the truth could come out. Sana felt something inside her break at that moment, not loudly but quietly, like a thread snapping under pressure. She realized that the man she lived with had two faces, one for the world and one for the darkness, and the second one was the one that had been walking around her bed every night. When her body finally released her from that frozen state, she screamed, pushing herself back against the wall, but Imran stepped away calmly, wiping his face with his sleeve, smearing the paint into a dull blur. He told her to stop being dramatic, that she was imagining things again, and the sudden change in his tone made her question everything she had just seen. But the mark on her cheek remained, a faint white streak that would not wash away completely, and the memory stayed clear, sharper than any dream. The next nights did not become easier, they became worse, because now she knew the footsteps were real, and the waiting had a purpose. He did not do it every night, and that made it even more frightening, because she never knew when he would become that version of himself again. He would act normal for days, even kind sometimes, making her doubt her fear. And then suddenly, in the middle of the night, she would feel that presence again, watching, waiting, enjoying her silence. You might think she left immediately, but leaving is not always simple, especially when fear and confusion are mixed together, and when the person causing the fear is also the one the world sees as harmless, funny, and kind. It took time, and it took one final night that she still cannot speak about without her voice shaking. That night, she pretended to sleep, just as he had pretended so many times, and when she felt him rise from the bed and start his slow walk around her, she stayed still, waiting for the moment when she could move. When he leaned close, whispering something she could not fully hear, she opened her eyes suddenly, and for the first time, she spoke before he could. She told him she was not afraid anymore, even though every part of her body was shaking, and something changed in his expression, something that looked almost like disappointment. He stepped back, his smile fading, and for a second, the room felt normal again. That was the moment she used to run, grabbing her keys and leaving the house without looking back, the sound of her own heartbeat louder than anything behind her. She never returned to that home, and she never turned off all the lights again. Even now, years later, she says the scariest part was not the painted face or the quiet footsteps, but the waiting, the patience of something that knew exactly when to show itself, choosing the moment when she was most alone, most unsure, and most vulnerable. And sometimes when the night is too quiet, she still feels that old fear returning, not as strong as before, but enough to remind her that some things do not disappear completely. They just wait, just like he did, until everyone is asleep.